Okay, so get ready for this one, listeners, because we are diving deep into something that sounds a little strange. Peronist degrowth.
Peronist debro.
Yeah, it's like, what?
Yeah.
How do those two things even go together?
Right.
Well, we are going to unpack all of that today as we take a deep dive into the work of Kohei Saito.
Yeah.
Now, he is a philosopher who is making a splash with some really interesting takes on tackling some of the world's biggest problems.
And what's great is the source material we're working with is actually very engaging. It's an interview with Saito, but it's framed as a conversation with BBC Mundo.
Oh, interesting.
Which adds this very interesting kind of global element to it.
Right. It's like he is almost speaking to like a global audience.
Exactly.
With this Peronist twist to it.
Yeah.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's all just take a step back and set the stage here.
Okay.
I think it's safe to say we are all feeling the weight of just all the global crises these days.
Yes.
Right. Climate change,
Mm-hmm.
inequality.
Yeah.
It's like these issues feel so massive and so much bigger than all of us.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you even begin to find solutions?
Absolutely. And I think that's where Saito's argument is really interesting, because he is essentially saying that the current system that we have, the one that we're operating under, which prioritizes endless economic growth, above all else, it's just not sustainable. It's like we're on this train.
It's going too fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we see a cliff, and he's saying, hey, guys, maybe we should start putting on the brakes and rethinking this whole thing.
Okay, so hitting the brakes.
Mm-hmm.
That's where this whole degrowth thing comes in.
Yeah. Yes.
But I have to say, every time I hear that word degrowth, I think about like living in a yurt
Right.
and growing my own food. Is that?
Yeah, it's a little scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a little scary for people.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big misconception that people have with degrowth, right? It's not about lowering our quality of life or going back to, the Stone Age or anything like that. It's more about shifting our focus.
Okay.
We are so focused on constantly chasing more. And I think we're starting to realize that more isn't necessarily leading to a better quality of life. It's really about prioritizing the things that truly matter. So well-being, equality, strong communities, and living in balance with our planet. So instead of constantly striving for that next promotion or that bigger house, imagine a world where you're valued for your contributions to your community, and having a good quality of life is the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
That's the essence of what Saito is proposing.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. I'm with you. But then Peronism, how on earth does Peronism fit into all of this?
Right.
Because for a lot of people, when they hear Peronism, they think of dictators.
Yeah.
They think of populism.
You're right. There's definitely some historical baggage associated with Peronism, especially the regimes that we saw in, 20th century Latin America.
Right.
But Saito's drawing inspiration from a different era of Peronist thought. He's going all the way back to the early days,
Interesting.
back to the 19th century.
Wow.
And he sees a real connection between those early ideals and the principles of degrowth.
So we're not talking about Evita on the balcony.
No.
Like, what are these early Peronist ideals,
Yeah.
and how do they actually relate to degrowth?
Yeah. Well, think about those community gardens that kind of started popping up everywhere during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Where people were coming together and sharing resources and working collectively to grow their own food.
Right.
Those are early Peronist values in action.
Interesting.
Prioritizing the collective good, ensuring that everybody has access to the resources, to
Yeah.
the opportunities.
I'm starting to see how this connects. Okay.
But it's still kind of theoretical for me. Like, how does this actually play out in the real world?
Yeah.
Like, this vision of a degrowth society, kind of inspired by early Peronism,
Right.
how do we actually make it a reality?
Right. That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And Saito actually argues that we're already seeing seeds of this transformation
Oh, really?
popping up all around us.
So, like, little green shoots of Peronist degrowth pushing their way through the cracks?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Like if you look at some European cities, for example,
Okay.
Copenhagen has implemented really strict building height limits.
Interesting.
They've chosen to kind of limit their physical expansion in favor of preserving green spaces and creating a more livable city for their citizens.
Okay.
Amsterdam and Barcelona are creating car-free zones.
Prioritizing pedestrians.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
those are kind of cities known for being fairly progressive.
Right.
But, I mean, that still seems like it's all operating within the existing system.
Yeah.
Like, are we trying to make capitalism a little bit nicer?
Yeah.
Is that really going to work?
Yeah, that's a really key tension, I think,
Yeah.
that Saito acknowledges, is that Capitalism is very good at absorbing these alternative ideas.
Right.
But he argues that by consciously recognizing these seeds, even if they're small,
Okay.
even if they're seemingly insignificant,
Yeah.
we can start to shift the direction of where we're going.
So it's about being intentional about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just accidentally stumbling into some degrowth practices, but actually choosing them
Exactly.
because they're part of a larger vision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where those early peronist principles,
Yeah.
the emphasis on community well-being, democratic decision-making,
Right.
prioritizing things like free education,
Yeah.
healthcare. These aren't just nice to have.
Right.
These are essential building blocks
Okay.
of a degrowth society.
Okay. This is all starting to click now. But let's talk about implementation for a second.
Okay.
Because we're talking about going from some cool cities,
Right.
doing some kind of interesting things, to a global system.
Yeah.
And we're facing global crises right now.
Yes.
So how do governments fit into all of this?
Probably.
Is he envisioning like a world government that's going to come in and be like, all right, everybody, degrow?
Not quite. Saito's not advocating for some top-down government-imposed revolution. He believes that real lasting change has to emerge from the ground up.
Okay.
From local communities, grassroots movements, cities experimenting with new ways of living.
So more power to the people than power to like the World Peronist Degrowth Organization.
Exactly. It's about a sort of percolating up rather than a top-down approach.
But what about things like climate change
Yeah?
that really do require global cooperation?
Right.
Does he address that at all?
He does. And he acknowledges that, of course, some degree of central planning and coordination will be necessary.
All right.
Especially when we're talking about tackling these global challenges like climate change.
Right.
But he really stresses that these larger plans need to be shaped by the needs and priorities of local communities,
Okay.
not imposed from some outside force.
That makes sense. But there is another question that we haven't talked about
Yeah.
that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds right now.
Right.
If we are talking about decreasing economic activity,
Yeah.
won't that end up hurting people?
Right.
Especially like the most vulnerable among us.
Yeah.
Like we've seen what economic downturns do.
Exactly. And that's
That's scary.
It really gets to the heart of how we measure progress
Right.
and well-being in society,
Yeah.
because we're so used to thinking about GDP
Right.
as the indicator of, are we doing well?
Yeah.
Are things going in the right direction?
It's like we just assume that more economic growth equals a better life for everyone.
Exactly. And Saito's arguing that that's fundamentally flawed
Okay.
to think that way.
So if we ditch GDP as like the main thing that we're going for, then what do we strive for?
Right.
How do we even begin to measure success in this degrowth society?
Right. And that's where I think Saito's ideas get really, really interesting. He's pointing out that, some of the wealthiest nations, despite having these really high GDPs, they're also plagued by poverty,
Right.
by inequality,
Yeah.
by poor health outcomes.
Yeah, and they have the resources.
Exactly. Like he uses the example of the U.S.
Okay.
The U.S. had a disproportionately high COVID death toll,
Right.
despite its wealth.
Yeah.
Despite all of its resources.
Yeah.
And so it really challenges this idea that economic growth is the solution to everything.
Yeah, it's not a guarantee of well-being.
Exactly.
So if we're not chasing GDP, then what are we chasing?
Right. It's about shifting from this mindset of more is always better to what truly makes for a good life.
Yeah.
And ensuring that everyone has access to the things that make for a good life. So access to housing,
Okay.
healthcare, education,
Essential things.
essential things, regardless of your income.
I like it.
It means prioritizing ecological sustainability,
Right.
reducing our impact,
Yeah.
and creating a more circular economy
Okay.
where we're not just constantly extracting
Right.
and consuming.
So it's about more than just individual choices then. It's about like a system change.
Exactly. It's a collective shift in how we organize ourselves.
This has been really interesting. Peronist degrowth. I think it's safe to say that we both learned a lot doing this deep dive.
I definitely did.
And I think it's really exciting to think that another world is possible, that we don't have to be stuck on this train speeding towards a cliff,
Yeah.
that maybe we can hit the brakes
Mm-hmm.
and build something better.
Exactly.
So to our listeners, we leave you with this. What kind of world do you want to live in?
Yes.
And what seeds of change do you see in your own community? And how can you help them grow?